Well, thank you for that introduction, and this is my pleasure to be here. I'm happy to be speaking and meeting everybody through Zoom. This is a great opportunity to speak to a lot of people. And let me say what the summary and purpose of my presentation today is. It might be some review information for some and some new information included in there. But my purpose and you could say my disclaimer is that this presentation is for the health aficionado who wants to push the envelope of human longevity and with respect to having the ideal performance of their body when they pass the age of 85 years old, because it's that last 15 years of life. I'm saying a healthy person living a very healthful life can live between 95 and 105 or 97 to 107 years old. That's the normal lifespan for healthy people taking good care of their health. But what good is living longer if you're not going to have your full physical and mental faculties in that later years? And a lot of time, decline in poor health for people who are on relatively healthful diets but not ideal diets, but their decline doesn't show itself till after the age of 80 or 85. And I'm going to really discuss about how to maintain life habits through the majority of our life to maintain excellent health when we get to be 85 or 90 years old. So the last decade of our life, we still have our physical and mental faculties to enjoy our lives fully and as much as possible. So that's what this is about. So even when I talk about ideal nutrition and the nuances that make a Nutritarian diet better or more lifespan promoting, keep in mind, I'm not saying other diets and other speakers aren't helping people improve their diet and get better outcomes than the standard American diet. But I'm just taking things a bit further for people who want to perfect things to a higher degree to assure higher probability of achieving superior health and pushing that envelope of human longevity. So with that said, let's get started. And I'm going to share my screen and present a few slides. And some of these slides may be review for some of you, and some of them obviously are new, but we have to go through some basics to be able to fully understand everything I'm going to say or teach. Okay, I hope you can see that now. All right, so let's get started. And I'm going to leave time at the end for questions and answers, and leave time for you to take notes and to make sure you understand these basic principles. So we're talking here about the same factors and the same dietary, you could say, portfolio that prevents against heart disease, also protects against cancer, and also protects against dementia. I'm making it clear at the beginning that the maximal lifestyle to slow aging and keep excellent health protects against all these diseases, not one diet for cancer and another diet to prevent heart disease and another diet to prevent dementia. There's not one plan for each of these different chronic illnesses. There's one most helpful plan that prevents against heart disease, strokes, cancers, and dementia. And what food factors protect against one problem is going to also protect against another problem. So I could talk about cancer, but I'm also talking about heart disease. And when I'm talking about heart disease, I'm also talking about cancer, because what's good for the heart cells is good for the brain cells and is good for the liver cells and the breast cells and the prostate cells. So just to make that clear, and I'm also saying that the dietary portfolio that's most effective to extend lifespan, if we can design the diet and tweak it to be ideal and not make it just good or better, but really make it best, then it's also going to be most effective to reverse disease and to use therapeutically when people have lupus or psoriatic arthritis or ulcerative colitis or chronic fatigue syndrome, or have damage from a vaccine injury or a toxic exposure, or they have early stage cancers. In other words, by taking this diet to a higher degree of excellence, it becomes more effective therapeutically. And it also becomes more effective when people haven't lived healthfully for half their lives. They haven't lived healthfully for half their lives. They're eating fried foods, salt, sugar, they're overweight, and then should they make moderate changes in their diet to make the diet more appealing for the masses? Is that what they should do? Or should they adopt a degree of nutritional excellence to allow the body to repair and heal from damage they could have caused earlier in life that isn't even visible, that could result in manifesting itself in some disease process later on. So, and before we start, I'm also suggesting that it's decades of exposure to proper nutrition that leads for a greater performance at the end of your life. In other words, it's your lifetime exposure to salt that affects your risk of cardiovascular death. And salt also suppresses immune function. It leads to weakening of the endothelial lining of blood vessels. It suppresses immunity, increases risk of infection, and it increases cardiovascular death, irrespective of its effect on blood pressure by damaging the endothelial lining. But moving to a low salt diet once you have cardiovascular disease is mostly too late. It's your lifetime exposure to sodium that determines that risks we're talking about. So you have to start to cut that out early in life and not wait till it's too late. That's where I'm objecting to the advice of the American Heart Association and the American College of Cardiology, who tell people to cut back on salt intake when they have developed heart disease, cut back on salt intake and don't eat more than 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. And I'm saying, how ridiculous advice is that? If it was right to eat 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day, then the whole population should be doing it. We shouldn't be doing it when you develop heart disease, because mostly it's too late then. You've developed an advanced stage. Heart disease and even high blood pressure is an advanced pathology. It's not an early pathology. You have pathology going on for decades before you develop even high blood pressure or develop signs of heart disease. That's like telling a person, if you develop lung cancer or COPD, you should quit smoking, which is an utterly ridiculous idea, because if smoking is bad for people who are sick, nobody should have started smoking to begin with. So my point with regard to all these things I'm talking about, remember the effects are going to be mitigated or lessened the later in life you choose to make those changes. So I'm encouraging people to make the changes now. And I'm also encouraging people to make a giant change in the way they're eating and their dietary performance, a giant change, not baby steps. Because baby steps don't work, because you keep consuming things that you're addicted to maintain your illicit love affair with these substances that are pulling you to eat them, which is causing overeating behavior, and it still prevents you from seeing the miraculous benefits. The whole miraculous self-healing properties of the body are fully manifest when you do it all the way, and then your taste buds improved and your taste muscle improves, and you stop desiring those things that are causing you to overeat and may be sick. But if you keep dabbling in them, like having a cigarette or a glass, or going to drink on the weekends, or having cigarettes for one day a week, you're going to always keep wanting the things you keep eating. The longer you're away from the addictive and harmful substances, the less desirous you are of them. And better you are at retraining your taste and learning to love what you're doing now. Okay, that's my introduction. So let's get started with the lecture. My first slide here talks about the basic principle of the Nutritarian diet, and I want you to memorize these 5 words. The 5 words reflect the most proven methodology to slow aging and extend human lifespan, and that is moderate caloric restriction in the context of micronutrient excellence. Those are the 5 words: moderate caloric restriction with micronutrient excellence. Because what we're looking for, sure, we want a diet with a high nutritional bang per caloric buck, a high nutrient diet, but ultimately what we're striving for is high nutrient density in our body's tissues and cells. So I'm representing this first principle with my health equation, H equals N over C, which means your healthy life expectancy and how healthy you are in your later years, not just living longer, but being super healthy in your later years, is proportional to the micronutrient per calorie ratio of your diet through life. And that means we're eating a diet with a high micronutrient per calorie, trying to eat foods that are rich in nutrients, and avoiding foods, particularly processed foods and ultra-processed foods that contain calories with no significant micronutrient load. And I use processed foods and sometimes white flour and sugar and honey as examples of high glycemic carbohydrates with no significant nutrient load. But keep in mind that I'm saying that a product made from white flour, like bread, pizza, Italian bread, croissants, bagels, cookies, cakes, waffles, cereals, these foods that are made from white flour are not really food, because white flour converts itself into sugar to enter the bloodstream. And it enters the bloodstream the same as if you had a sugar cube or just ate sugar with a spoon right out of a sugar jar. There's no difference. Those things are not food because they don't supply the nutrients, the cofactors, the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, and the antioxidants. There's no supplying of the cofactors the body needs to metabolize sugar and to turn it into energy. So because it's efficiently converted into energy, it means it's utilizing and stripping the body of nutrient reserves and more easily stored as fat, and then keeps you fatigued all the time because it's not efficiently converted into energy and desirous of more calories. So a food is something that contributes nourishment to the body, and these low nutrient foods are not foods. I call them the opposite of food, or food spelled backwards is spelled doof, D-O-O-F. If you eat these things, which are like drugs, and make a person become addicted to them and desirous of more highly concentrated calories, and you're a doof if you're going to eat those things at all because they're addicting. So this is the first principle of the Nutritarian diet. And of course, we're talking here about moderate caloric restriction to maintain a favorable body size and body fat percent. So we're adjusting what we're eating, and we're adjusting how much we're eating. And I make the joke, I always say, half of what you eat, people live on half of what they eat, and the other half meets the needs of their doctors. In other words, half of what you eat meets your needs, and the other half meets the needs of your doctors. And even though that sounds it's like a joke and it sounds kind of silly, yeah, half of what I eat I don't need, makes me sick, but actually it's pretty accurate. Because the average calorie consumption in America is like 3,400 calories per person, per capita calories. And in healthy populations and healthy people only require around 1,500 calories a day, really based on individual differences between 1,200 and 1,800. And most people are eating almost double the amount of calories they need. And I'm also saying here that this low nutrient intake, particularly the lack of green vegetables and mushrooms and onions and berries and seeds and all different types of colorful vegetables, whole grains, we're saying here that a huge variety of plant foods supply a full spectrum, a cornucopia of nutrients that human bodies can utilize. And that when you have a high nutrient concentration in your tissues, you desire less calories. And so the foods that are healthiest for us satiate us and remove our cravings to overeat. So diets of all description fail, meaning diets for weight loss fail. People can't lose weight because they're not focused on the quality of what they're eating sufficiently and moderating the dietary quality to get enough nutrients in their tissues so they don't have an abnormal instinctual drive for calories. They haven't normalized their instinctual drive for calories. They discombobulated it because their diet is not nutritionally adequate. So let's review, of course. So I'm saying here that, let's see, how can I move this? Give me 1 second here.
Sorry, Dr. Fuhrman, you're trying to use to cycle your slides forward?
No, I was trying to move the bar across the top to the bottom because I can't read my slide with the bar. I was just trying to move the bar.
Yeah, so what you can do is there's 3 dots on there. Can you see 3 dots?
Yes.
You can do hide meeting controls, and that should allow you to hide the bar.
Great, hide feed. Great. And then how do I get them back again if I want them back again?
Press escape.
Press escape and it comes back. Thank you for your help. Appreciate that.
No problem.
You learn something new every day, right? Hide floating meeting controls. Okay, got it. Thank you so much. And of course, we're talking here about maintaining the neuroplasticity and fluidity of cellular membranes. We're going to talk about this in this presentation to give us that ability and enjoyment from learning new things and keeping ourselves open to be able to use logic and reasoning to change our thought process and change our belief systems. And that's part of the aging process, being excited and passionate about living and learning right through and enjoying our life, part of the enjoyment of life, and not become rigid, fixated, and egocentric. So we're talking about, so thanks for your help. Okay, so we're talking here about the recommended body weights for maximizing longevity, and that for males, the body fat is be recommended below 15%, which represents a BMI based on individual differences between 19 and 23. And for a female, to have a BMI below 25%. And what I'm saying is that as your body fat goes from 15% for a male to 18% to 20% to 25% to 30%, as it goes up, so does insulin resistance, which is accordingly goes up, which is a factor for aging more quickly in a shorter lifespan. And when the cells become more insulin resistant, the body has to produce more circulating insulin, and having a higher levels of circulating insulin promotes angiogenesis. It's a primary fat storage hormone, and angiogenesis refers to the enabling fat cells to grow by producing more blood vessel growth to bring nutrients to the fat to allow it to grow. And this process where insulin promotes fat storage and angiogenesis allow tumor cells to grow and replicate. And therefore, angiogenesis is a necessary ingredient in the witch's cauldron cancer production. So the high insulin is a factor that promotes cancer on the body as well as aging the body quicker. And then you have higher rates of estrogen production. The aromatase production is exacerbated by fat cells. And as you get heavier, the fat cell becomes more pro-inflammatory, spewing out more reactive oxygen species, including cytokines and lipokines that suppress immune system, inhibit gene silencing, and also prevent the body to identify cells and natural killer T cells, cause apoptosis of dying or dysfunctional cells or cells that could eventually go to cancer. I know I said that very rapidly. I'm going to slow that back a little bit and say that to give you the overall process here that, for example, when a person gets exposed to COVID, their morbidity and mortality is enhanced when they're more overweight and sickly because their body is more pro-inflammatory and producing more cytokines and lipokines and other of these agents that come from the fat cells and are dumped into the circulation that make the body more inflammatory prone. And that inflammatory process also suppresses immune function. And I mentioned the term gene silencing because when you eat a diet with lots of healthy phytonutrients, you activate the portion of the cell that can silence abnormal genes that might lead to disease. So as we get acquired gene defects or inherited gene defects, like the BRCA1 gene that increases risk of breast and ovarian cancer, that gene becomes silenced with a high exposure to vegetables, especially green vegetables, especially green cruciferous vegetables. Then scientists call this gene silencing because our diet affects who we are. Our genes aren't what we inherit. Our genes are what we eat and how we live, much more important because the genes are either expressed or not expressed based on the nutritional content of our diet. So, of course, we're talking here that the healthiest lifespans for people living to be a centenarian with the most mental and physical faculties later in life are based on people who don't get too thin or too heavy, but strive for that muscular, lean, and strong body through most of their life and keeping body fat low. And as you probably heard, more body fat, which increases estrogen proportionally and also lowers testosterone. So it increases risk of prostate and breast cancer. And we want to lower estrogen and maintain testosterone production, which has an effect to lower prostate cancer and breast cancer. So we're talking here about it's so important to be modulating us health nuts and health aficionados are trying to modulate our diet, eat as healthy as we can, but at the same time, we're trying to eat what we eat and how much we eat is all part of the process. And now I can't advance my slides. So there it goes. Now I can. So what I'm saying here is just imagine this for a minute. If I'm eating more calories, let's say I'm eating 300 calories, one cookie or a bagel extra each day that I shouldn't be eating. Let's say my basal metabolic rate without exercise is 1,500 calories a day, but I eat 1,700 calories a day. Well, is that 100 calories times 350 days a year? And since a pound of fat on your body is about 3,500 calories, so if I ate 200 calories a day extra, you would expect a 20-pound weight gain after a year, but it doesn't cause a 20-pound weight gain. It only causes a 10-pound weight gain because what happens when you overshoot calories is your metabolism is speeded up. Your body temperature gets higher, your calories spent through breathing is enhanced. Is slowed down. Yeah, is enhanced, excuse me. And you have an enhanced respiratory quotient. You're speeding up, you're running your body temperature higher, and you're running your thyroid higher. And keep in mind, running the engine at a higher furnace, turning the furnace hotter and revving the car to run faster burns it out faster. We want to run our furnace slower. Matter of fact, in the normal range of thyroid function, of free T4, we have more lifespan and lower rates of cardiac arrhythmia and cardiovascular death in the bottom half of the normal range compared to the top half of the normal range. So we want to have a moderately slow thyroid function. We want our body temperature to be lower, not higher. And so what I'm saying right now is that people gaining weight aren't just eating a little extra calories, they're eating a lot extra calories they didn't need. Because all those calories aren't even putting fat on their body. If they became fat, they're eating a huge amount of calories, more than they really needed. And the goal to a long life is not to have extra calories, which is to eat the minimum of what we need without getting too thin, to modulate our weight. So the less we eat, the longer we live without getting too thin. But if you can get too thin, that wouldn't be favorable either. I'm not saying become anorexic. And that's why we say moderate caloric restriction, not severe caloric restriction. We want to moderately caloric restrict. So we're not going around hungry all the time, but we're eating enough bulk, enough fiber, and enough nutrients to be able to eat when we're hungry and not eat when we're not hungry. And they always say hunger is the best sauce, because one of those symptoms of hunger is it enhances taste sensation, and we become, over time, instinctually desirous of the right amount of calories and even the right foods. So to reiterate what I've said so far, to slow the aging process, we're eating a lower calorie, high nutrient diet, and the more nutrients and fiber we eat with better quality food, the less calories we're going to desire. And that's going to reduce inflammation, suppress genetic alterations, and slow the metabolic rate, which is favorable because the metabolic rate is the rate at which we're aging. We want it. So if I undershoot my calories, I don't just lose weight, my metabolism slows, which then stabilizes my stem cells from aging and helps maintain telomere length and stem cell function for later in life when they're more utilized. So, and of course, it increases the ability of the body to detoxify and heal and repair and reduce free radical production. And that leads us to this concept of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating. And I'm saying the circadian rhythms, and since we're trying, and our need for calories decreases later in the day and in the evening when we're not active. But most healing takes place and most healing and repair. So the anti-aging phenomena is enhanced during sleep. And the enhancement of activity of the anti-aging phenomenon occurs during sleep when you're not digesting food the best. So sleeping when your body's not digesting. So not sleeping on a full stomach, but sleeping on an empty stomach is the way we live longer. And that means we're trying to eat lighter at night and finish dinner earlier. So let's say I'm finished dinner by 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I go to bed at 10. When I ate light enough, so by 10 o'clock, I'm going to bed and I can not on a full stomach, as opposed to some people's social and pattern of living is they're likely to late dinner at 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, where they keep eating or snacking till the evening, and they go to bed on a full stomach. And that's one of the worst things you can do if you're looking to extend human longevity. And if you're a health aficionado and a longevity aficionado like me, and a lot of people that I'm teaching to, then you really want to consume your calories earlier in the day and reduce your calories later in the day and make a delicious dinner, but a lighter dinner and earlier. So we want to increase that. So when you eat and how much you eat play a role here. Here's a study where they gave people moderate caloric restriction, about 14% reduction in calories compared to what they were eating over a 2-year period, published in the journal Science. And it showed a tremendous increase in health and actually anti-aging phenomena. And I'm making this most ridiculous claim and saying the body can age backwards. How can you age backwards? That's so stupid, Dr. Fuhrman, But no, we measure those telomeres and methylation defects and epigenetic changes and do some of those tests on those longevity testing. And we can find that after people adopt this program, they come to my retreat for the 30 months and if we test them later on, they see that their biological age has gone lower. And like we're showing here in this study published in the Science journal, is that when people calorically restricted with adequate nutrition, it found it increased immune function of the T cells, tissue regenerated, stem cells regenerated, telomeres went longer, reduced menstrual pain, enhanced. In other words, they found findings that reflected aging backwards with caloric restriction. Now, in addition to eating right, and I recommend a diet high in natural and colorful plants, a huge assortment of colorful plant foods, because I'm saying here, of course, that processed foods and like white flour and other ultra-processed foods don't contain a significant micronutrient load. But I'm also saying that animal products like chicken does not contain a significant load of micronutrients, and it doesn't have vitamins, a high intake of vitamins and phytochemicals and antioxidants. So both the animal products and the processed foods are relatively low in nutrients. So we're trying to increase our exposure to lifespan enhancing nutrients by eating more colorful plants. But at the same time, diet's not everything, because getting sleep is important, getting regular exercise is important, having emotional poise and being happy all these things are important. But so is our exposure to xenobiotics, which means there are things that are not part of the human body. We put in things inside the body that can't be utilized as part of normal body tissue. It's foreign material. So there are two types of wastes we can produce in the body. And the one waste is called endogenous waste, like free radicals or reactive oxygen species or advanced glycation end products, which are wastes produced by the body itself. And a normal metabolism produces waste that has to be eliminated. But we also are exposed to exogenous wastes, waste from the external environment. We inhale secondhand cigarette smoke, or we're around a forest fire inhaling polyaromatic hydrocarbons from smoke, which can impair our health. Or exposed to drugs, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, vaccines, cosmetics, flavorings, food additives, plastic particles, plastic leaching, industrial chemicals, environmental pollutants. We're also in a part in human history where the chance of being exposed to xenobiotics has increased, and many people are aware that excessive exposure to xenobiotics, especially some particular sensitizing xenobiotics, can be more sensitizing for some people than others based on genetics and prior diet. All affects that, and we're going to talk about all these things, making maybe some people more sensitized or more likely to get a reaction to getting a COVID vaccine. They can develop hypersensitivity reactions and immune suppression and inflammation. Some people in response to the COVID vaccine has developed myocarditis and pericarditis and chronic toxic encephalitis with memory, cognition, tinnitus, headaches, dizziness. And we're talking here about the overall health detrimental effects of being exposed to medical care. Drugs are not harmless. The first thing we learn in medical school is all drugs have toxic effects, and we're not taking them because they're nutritive substances. We're taking them, they have an ability to block or interfere with normal body function. And then so the pharmaceutical effects we're looking for are the effect that we know are caused by toxicity. And we want to live in a manner to avoid the need for medicinal substances that can be toxic. So we always err on the side of a naturalistic bent to try to lessen our exposure to things that can harm us. And the better we keep our health, the less we need drugs, vaccines, and things like that could potentially cause a problem. But keep in mind, we're all exposed to some of these toxins, and we have to live in a manner to reduce the exposure to toxic waste, but also have the right foods and supplemental ingredients so our body can deal with these toxic waste products. A good example is this substance called BMAA, beta-methylaminoalanine, which you don't have to memorize that. Just remember BMAA, because BMAA they're finding as a major causative factor in the Parkinson's dementia syndrome. Well, the slide has a typo. It should be PDS, not PDC. It's Parkinson's dementia syndrome. PDS and ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. In other words, we're seeing clustering of ALS around lakes and around Chesapeake Bay and areas where people are eating fish, seafood, crustaceans or crabs and lobster, and particularly bivalves. I learned about that word bivalves. I didn't even know that word bivalves, a few years ago. But bivalves refer to, if you haven't heard of it, it refers to clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops. I used to think as a treat those were the things like lobster, crab, clams, oysters, things you would have as a treat food once in a while, when you went to a vacation or something. But now it's recognized that these foods are a major cause of serious neurologic deficit because they filter these toxins in the bottom of the ocean. And there's so much dumping of garbage in the ocean. We dump thousands of pounds of garbage. But in the ocean, causing plastic compounds and microplastics to be invaded fish and small seafood. But also, we're talking here about the runoff of nitrogenous waste from fish farms and commercial farming methods, and even from sewage that causes algae bloom. And the cyanobacteria that live on the algae bloom produce this BMAA. And then we have a high amount of BMA concentrating in these bivalves, meaning that even the occasional consumption could be risky, but a regular consumption is particularly dangerous. And so we really so it's making us more alarmed and more cautious in the use of seafood. I remember years ago when I started out in my medical practice, like 35 years ago or so, the shark cartilage was in the rage, right? Shark cartilage to prevent cancer, and now we realize that like shark cartilage has the most cancer causing potential. It's got the most BMAA in it because the predatory fish eats the littler, eats smaller fish. So of course the larger fish, tuna, swordfish, shark, things like that are particularly toxic. But of course, I never knew before that. I always thought it was probably okay to eat a little bit of the smaller stuff, but now I know even that's not okay because of the concentration of microplastics and BMAA in these bottom feeders and even in smaller fish. And the average American now has a credit card amount of microplastic in their body, which is an endocrine disruptor. So we're increasing the risk of disease seriously. And remember, the average woman, let's say I'm giving this an example of the average woman who eats the same amount of calories and the same amount of exercise in 2020 compared to 1970 is 40 pounds heavier in 2020 than she would have been in 1970, consuming the same amount of calories, because these endocrine disruptors and toxins and microplastic particles blow people up and make them make the weight. The body has to dilute itself from diluting the toxicity of its tissues by holding onto body weight. So we do need to detoxify and avoid the use and avoid the intake of these things. I know that a lot of obstetricians and gynecologists are telling the pregnant women not to eat seafood more than once a week, but now we're realizing that even once a week puts people at significant risk. So it is more alarming here than ever before. And the other things that are toxic to the body that increase your appetite and make you overweight and keep that tissue acidity and blow you up is obviously salt, sugar, and oil. Salt increases is an appetite stimulant. And oil is rancid, and it's rancid because they use rancid and chemical compounds to extract it from the food it came from. But also, as you heat oil to the degree that it's heated and the amount of time it's heated, the amount of temperature it's heated at, it forms more dangerous genocidal and carcinogenic and substances. So we're talking about oil is extremely fattening. And the point is, and I wrote on the bottom of this slide, is how many calories can you fit in your bloodstream at one time? Because if you eat a normal meal with vegetables and fruit and a little bit of, quinoa or beans or nuts or broccoli and, whatever you're eating, we're eating a normal meal, you can't fit that many calories in the human stomach. And those calories are absorbed so slowly, you can't fit that many calories in your blood. You only have 100 calories in the blood at one time. You have to use processed foods like oils and sugars and flours to get 300, 400 calories in the blood all at one time. And it's the high spiking of calories in the blood that act like opiates on the brain and make you unsatisfied, over time, you become the overstimulation of dopamine from the acceleration height of the caloric and concentration of the bloodstream. Leads you to feeling empty and unsatisfied with a meal, unless you're eating some chocolate or candy or pushing in some oil or fried food or heavy things or have some meat or have some melt cheese on it and you need heavily calorically concentrated substance to be satisfied because you adapted yourself to that over time. And eating natural foods, you can't put that much calories into the bloodstream at one time. And of course, this is the basis in the development of food addiction. right? If you want to get overweight, keep doing what other Americans do, because we've radically increased the oil consumption in America. It's now 20% of the calories consumed in the United States is empty calorie oils. So now we have processed foods, animal products, and oils, which supply most of our caloric needs. And since 1970, even from 1970 to 2020 to 2020, can you imagine we increased our oil consumption by like 60%? Between dairy, fat, and oil, our fat consumption and our caloric consumption has increased radically in those 50 years as well. It's only 50 years ago. Yikes. So we're talking here about the more fried foods a population eats, particularly in southern United States. You have more increased morbidity and mortality, more breast cancer, more prostate cancer, more strokes, more heart attacks, more depression, more murder, more mental illness, more suicides, more people who have lost the capacity to actually be caring, peaceful, and think more clearly, logically, and creative even, and kindly, because we affect the brain. The more unhealthy and the more overweight and diabetic, and the more we're eating junk food and sweets and commercial baked goods and processed foods and some fried foods, the more we increase the risk of mental illness and abnormal behavior. And I wrote a book about that called Fast Food Genocide, describing the effect of food on mental illness and the very close dose-dependent relationship between commercial baked goods and fast food and depression and other mental illnesses, and how it affects people's behavior. And of course, the City Diet Heart Study showed vegetable oils were more dangerous than red meat even, but people are pouring oil over their food, And the oil, of course, cooked oils damages the gut, as a leading fried foods are a major cause of inflammatory bowel disease. And not just sugar, but also salt drives epithelial damage and injury of the digestive tract, because the tight junctions glue those cells together. And we have a combination of factors here. We have the gluing together of the cells in the lining of our digestive tract, and the buildup of the intraepithelial lymphocytes behind the villi of the small intestines, which forms a complex leading to the defenders at the gate of the castle. So our immune system function that surrounds the gut and the integrity of the digestive lining is dependent by healthy eating. And we build that integrity of the intestinal lining with good bacteria, creating a heavy biofilm of healthy bacteria over the villi with good tight junctions. And if we want to destroy that, we eat more meats and sweets. And of course, we have more salt and oil. And so you have sugar, salt, and oil, which leads to addiction, but also destroys the intestinal digestive tract lining at the same time, and increases risk of autoimmune disease too. So salt is a significant factor here, and people can become adapted to a high salt diet. They're excreting a lot of salt through their sweat and through their urine all the time because they're eating so much salt. And they go to exercise, to run a couple of miles, or to play a game of basketball or tennis. I mean, they get cramping in their legs and they're taking salt tablets because they're getting rid of, when your body removes sodium, and your body's always trying to rid itself of all the extra sodium, it's pulling out other minerals in the process. When you're sweating out salt and urinating out salt, you're losing other minerals besides salt. You're not just only taking out sodium. You can get cramping or try to drink those electrolyte drinks or take whatever you want. But if you really wanted to do things right, you wouldn't take the salt to begin with. So your sweat wouldn't lose salt when you sweated, and you wouldn't be peeing out so much salt, and you wouldn't be able to drink all the time, and you wouldn't be having to wash minerals out of your body all the time. So what I'm saying here is your body adapts long-term to a lower salt intake by holding on to sodium and holding on to the minerals in the body. You're not pushing them out all the time, and you're not going to cramp up in the heat. Or when you're doing a lot of exercise, you're not going to need to drink all the time to wash away all the extra sodium either. But in any case, we're saying that the digestive tract is dependent on healthful foods, and your immune system is dependent on the immune system, and green vegetables are a major factor fueling the growth of a healthy gut. And if you don't like green vegetables, you better live close to a hospital, as if that's going to help you. But the point I'm making is we're a green vegetable dependent animal like the other primates. And green vegetables are needed to support the development of a healthy immune system and the robustness. And this is why where people are exposed to serious outcomes from infections, even something that like COVID didn't have to be a serious infection if we had a healthy population, but nobody was focused on a healthy population. even with the people dying left and right, and seeing that it was killing people that were the healthiest the most, people still didn't eat healthily and lose weight. Because during COVID, people gained more weight, and now we have even the overall lifespan of Americans has even gone down in the last 5 years, and not even gone down from COVID-related deaths, but gone down from other type of causes of death as well. So it's just amazing to me that as we learn more and more, people are still doing the wrong things, and because their addictions are so severe, and death is not even enough of a fear to scare them to eat right. And I want you to memorize these 10 words or so. Let's count these words, what I'm going to say here now. I want you to memorize this. Raw vegetables have the most consistent and powerful association with the reduction of cancers of all types. That's about 10 words. I might have missed a word or two. So, I've reviewed more than 30,000 studies. I have 2,000 references in my book, Eat for Life, for example, but I had to review maybe to get 2,000 references. Maybe I took years reviewing maybe 10,000 articles to pick out those 2,000. But over a period of years, it's getting a full review of the world's nutritional literature, and you can say married with clinical experience, show that our immune system is really dependent on, our body is really dependent on the consumption of raw vegetables, particularly lettuce is a superfood, and the mixture between lettuces and raw green cruciferous vegetables like bok choy, cabbage, arugula, watercress, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, that combination gives you the ideal balance to the bacteria in the gut. And these two raw foods, the raw green vegetables, the raw onion and scallion, and the two cooked foods, the cooked mushrooms and the cooked beans, build us the healthiest microbiome. So vegetables protect the DNA, of course, and green vegetables protect the DNA the most. They'll give an example of the study on Fiji Islanders showing even though they smoke like fiends, they hardly have any lung cancer over there because they eat a lot of green vegetables. Whereas the Hawaiian Islanders who don't smoke, who don't smoke as much, have more lung cancer. They don't eat vegetables as much. We're talking here about a vegetable-based diet, not a grain-based diet. So we're talking here about a vegetable-based diet. And if we look at centenarians and we look at lifespan studies, we show that green vegetables and green cruciferous vegetables in particular have no threshold effect. No threshold effect means the more people eat, and as far as the study can be concerned, in higher amounts led to the most probability of people living the longest or living to 100 years old. So maybe with mushrooms and onions and tomatoes, and you may have a threshold effect. Means that once you have a half a cup of onion or mushroom, you're not going to have 2 cups. It's not going to make you live longer. You already had the half a cup. Maybe once you had a cup of tomato sauce, having or half a cup, 2 cups. Not. But with green vegetables, it's not true. As people went from 1 cup to 2 cups to 3 cups to 4 cups of green vegetables, you still saw enhancement in lifespan. And so many Americans eat no green vegetables, and the total vegetable consumption in America is only 2% of total calories. So I'm emphasizing that vegetables be the major source of calories. And speaking about cruciferous vegetables in particular, take a look at the cell here, because you see that little M in the cell wall, that represents that myrosinase enzyme that is not activated or broken or activated and doesn't mix with the central glucosinolates unless you chew the cell wall open and break those little packets. So when you're eating a salad and chewing it really well, and are eating broccoli or Brussels sprouts or cabbage or collard greens or bok choy. Bok choy is one of my favorites, things to grow because it grows so easily without insects. You don't get aphids and whiteflies and, it's very resilient to disease and easy to grow. You cut it, it's so beautiful looking, and you can juice it. You can eat it raw. You can cook it. You can do it. It's so versatile too. But I'm saying chew these things very well. Concentrate on chewing. Be very mindful because it's breaking open because the isothiocyanates, the ITCs, form in the mouth the better you chew things. And G-BOMBs refers to those 6 foods, greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds, which have the most scientific evidence for having lifespan enhancing and anti-cancer effects. And when you put together a dietary portfolio that includes a wide variety of these types of plant foods in your diet, you have onions and mushrooms and berries and seeds and nuts and green vegetables, you get the most potential to live a long life. So in other words, narrowing your diet to be plant-based may help you, But if it's rice-based or potato-based or fruit-based, and you don't have the variety of other foods that are sufficient, you're not going to get the ability to push the envelope of human longevity. Variety and including enough green vegetables makes a big difference. And that's one of the messages you're getting about this lecture, that these protective foods like onions and mushrooms and berries and greens have powerful anti-cancer effects, anti-fat storage effects, and anti-angiogenic effects. They're like a natural anti-cancer mechanism, and they have other anti-cancer gene silencing and accelerate removal of toxic carcinogenic compounds from the cell and increase cellular repair mechanisms. Whereas that load of oil calories or sugar calories entering the bloodstream does the opposite. The surge of calories in the bloodstream gets too high, it suppresses immunity. And we're talking about high glycemic carbohydrates right now, which means how much glucose can you get in the bloodstream after you eat that meal. The glycemic load refers to how fast that sugar comes in, how much comes in right away versus coming in over hours. And when you eat something like a bean, the carbohydrate calories, when converted into glucose, comes into the bloodstream slowly over a 3 or 4 hour period. Whereas you eat white flour or sugar or honey, it might come into the bloodstream in 5 minutes. Like we say with oil, from the lips to the hips, in 5 minutes flat, goes in right away. We get the same calories from a nut or seed. It inhibits its absorption, going in slowly. The body can preferentially burn it for energy instead of storing it as fat. And so it's a completely different biologic effect. So one causes satiation, desire not to eat for hours, and the other comes in quickly and stimulates the brain to want to consume more calories. We're talking about comparing oil to eating the same food that supplied that oil. So glycemic load, high glycemic load diets, more sweets, are linked to multiple cancers and, of course, gallbladder disease, dementia, aging of the body. And if we rate carbohydrates on a hierarchical scale of quality, we see that beans in general have the most slowly digestible carbohydrates. They go into the bloodstream more slowly. They have the most fiber. They have the most resistant starch, which also gets degraded by bacteria in the gut to affect that biofilm, to slow the absorption of glucose. The glucose excursion into the bloodstream is slowed by those foods we're talking about, including beans, which are a combination of high in resistant starch, high in fiber, and high in slowly digestible carbohydrates. And because the resistant starch is not absorbable into the bloodstream, the calories are lost. And they produce more of the short-chain fatty acids activated by bacterial action on the fibers, which becomes a negative feedback loop to the apostat in the central nervous system. Butyrate has a negative effect on appetite in the apostat in the hypothalamus. And butyrate is a breakdown product from fiber and resistant starch. So when a person looking to lose weight, who's diabetic or more overweight, we do want them to have more beans, because also when we have more beans in the diet compared to other sources, we favor beans and have regular consumption of beans in the diet. It has more powerful anti-cancer effects and more protein, more plant protein, because beans are high in protein. And keep in mind that since the bean is already high in protein, since the resistant starch component is not absorbed into the bloodstream, it's counted as a carbohydrate portion of the bean. The actual part of available calories that are protein in the bean is even higher than what you have thought. And we're going to talk about protein in a minute here. So beans protect against cancer, whereas high glycemic diets has been shown to increase the risk of cancer. For example, here's a study showing increased risk of breast cancer by 87% in people eating more high glycemic diets. And just the 2 times a week, that's amazing. Just consuming beans twice a week decreased risk of breast cancer by 24% in the Nurses' Health Study. And of course, beans are full of all kinds of beneficial nutrients like inositol pentachous phosphate, lignans, and polyphenols. And keep in mind that we have a lot of evidence in recent studies, and we give studies more credence if one study corroborates and shows the same thing another study showed. And we also give a study high credence points if it includes a large number of people. And it follows people to strong endpoints or hard endpoints, which means death or cancer diagnosis or a heart attack. We don't just see the cholesterol goes down, the triglyceride improves, the person lost weight, that's a soft endpoint. The hard endpoint takes years to look at to see if the person really did benefit and really did live longer from having those soft endpoint changes. So here's a 25-year study, which is a huge amount of time for a study, studying different protein intake and how much protein people consumed. And they found that the more animal protein people ate, the shorter they lived. And the more plant protein they ate, the longer they lived, and higher intake of plant proteins. And when we're talking about high protein plant foods, we're talking about foods, pretty much plant foods that are not processed like white flour or not fruit. So it's because beans, nuts and seeds, and green vegetables, and even some grains like quinoa, amaranth, and teff, are relatively high in protein, have plenty of protein. So unless the diet is like so I'm not saying a low protein plant-based diet isn't better than the American diet, but keep in mind that protein bioavailability goes down with aging, and diets that are marginally too low in protein affect a person's health and vitality when they get to be after 85 years old with frailty, increased risk of hip fracture, falls, loss of brain size, and of course, loss of muscular fitness and agility as well. So we're talking here, protein does matter, particularly as you age. And so we want to have a diet that's plant protein adequate. And we're going to continue to talk about that. And here's I just wrote down 3 studies. If people wanted to see the conversion of this study from 2016, a study, 2018, 2020, the continuing study of protein and lifespan showing more animal protein leads to more in early life mortality, and early life mortality means death before the age of 70, an increased risk of early life death. And these keto diets and these paleo diets and these carnivore diets are particularly lifespan threatening and dangerous, but you don't sometimes see the dangers until people get older, but then they don't really get to be that elderly because there's too high risk of early life death. And we're talking about the fact, a lot of reasons why animal protein affects death, early death, and plant protein extends lifespan. A few of these things we can talk about. I don't want to spend too much time on them. One is IGF-1, the fact that the high biological value of animal proteins go into the bloodstream, which are linked to obviously higher rates of cancer, but they're growth promoters. And we shouldn't be promoting growth of cells. They're angiogenesis promoting. They allow cells to replicate and grow, and they allow cells to metastasize and cause cancer. And also there's a lot of other reasons why, including the exposure of, we're talking about to the digestive tract, a different microbiome, and the production of pro-inflammatory modulators and chemicals given off by bacteria in the gut, like TMAO, which excites the endothelium and can even promote inflammation in the body and increase your propensity for dementia and cancer. But there's a lot of other reasons why, which I'm not going into right now. But with plant proteins, don't raise IGF-1 to unfavorably high levels. Those of us eating a higher protein plant diet are maintaining muscle mass and strength as we age, and we're still keeping our IGF-1 favorable. So we're able to eat more higher protein plant foods like quinoa and soybeans and broccoli, right? And black beans and lentils and things like that to keep our protein, our athletic prowess, and keep ourselves strong and, weightlifting and running and doing that, being agile and doing things for fitness and having a diet of high in protein without having to use animal products, because they have different biological effects. Just like walnut oil has a different biological effect than eating a walnut. So the lower levels of IGF-1 is the goal. You want your levels to be below 160 or so, but if your levels get too low, obviously, with too low in protein as you age, then it can lead to frailty and poor health. And as a person gets frail, and poor protein exposure in later life could lead to poor immune function, increasing risk of cancer or even infectious-related death. Now, nuts and seeds are very important to reemphasize this, because I continue to see this process where people are promoting myths about nuts and seeds and giving people things like, oh, I heard just yesterday, a client of mine said her doctor, who was a plant-based eater, a vegan at one of these plant-based health centers, told her that her cholesterol was high and she should cut out the nuts to lower her cholesterol. And I just want to be very clear about this, because we know right now that nuts and seeds are linked to dramatic lower morbidity and mortality from heart disease. So all the studies corroborate each other. We have a high degree of corroboration, means that different parts of the world, different numbers of people, long-term studies, large numbers of people show a dramatic reduction of cardiovascular death and all-cause mortality, even cancer deaths. So nuts and seeds are tremendously helpful, and that means helpful for people who have heart disease. They don't raise cholesterol, they lower cholesterol, and they don't cause weight gain, they cause weight loss compared to an equal size amount of carbohydrate or other food they're compared against. In other words, sure, if you snack on nuts and eating huge amounts in addition to your regular diet, anything you eat in excess can cause weight gain. But if you're using them with meals and not as snacks and they're part of the meal, and isocaloric means you took out some other food and you put that calories from nuts and seeds in, then they cause more weight loss and more beneficial cardiovascular reversal and safety. Let me review some of those studies and data, okay? And I wrote a medical journal study on this, and I'll reference that journal if you want to review more than 50 references documenting this. So here's a meta-analysis. I'm describing a tremendously decrease in cardiovascular death in people eating nuts and seeds, 1 serving a day. And then I'm referring down below to the Adventist Health Study 2, which corroborated what they found in Adventist Health Study 1, was about a 40% reduction in cardiovascular deaths and a huge reduction in all-cause mortality in those people who were eating in the highest quintile of nut and seed intake. And that was held true in all cohorts, meaning young in different races and different sexes, and in flexitarians, pescatarians, and near vegans and vegans. In all categories, nut and seed intake was correlated in a dose-dependent manner to enhancement in lifespan. So here's the hazard ratios for CVD, or cardiovascular disease mortality, in Adventist Health Study 2 by the quintile of protein from nuts and seeds, which showed that in the first group, not eating that much had a highest level of death, premature death. And as people went up to the highest intake of nut and seed, they had a 60% lowering of cardiovascular deaths. And of course, this held true in vegan populations, and which showed also that lower fat vegans had higher risk of death, which was also corroborated by the Prevmed study. Will show later that low-fat diets and extreme low-fat diets had more premature death than diets that even adding some olive oil to the diet had some benefit compared to a diet that low in fat. But adding nuts and seed had the most benefit. Even the Prevmed study showed that in this large study comparing olive oil to nuts and low-fat diets, that the longest lifespan and the lowest rates of cardiovascular death were found in people who were eating nuts and seeds at baseline, and then randomized to the group told to eat nuts and seeds, not olive oil. So those people who were eating nuts and seeds at baseline randomized to eat olive oil, or randomized to eat low fat, or in other words, the group who are eating olive oil. So it's a very complicated study, but of course the highest lifespan occurred in people eating nuts and seeds who were then randomized to continue eating nuts and seeds. Okay, so should you avoid nuts and seeds to lose weight? Should we avoid nuts if you have heart disease? Well, these ideas have been thoroughly tested, investigated, and disproven in every study that looks at strong endpoints, meaning that nuts and seeds lower cholesterol, they lower body weight, they reduce cardiovascular deaths, and they improve diabetic parameters. So there are a lot of myths, and here's a pooled analysis of 25 trials showing nuts and seeds have a dose-dependent relationship to lower LDL cholesterol, particularly oxidized LDL, because the sterols and stanols in nuts and seeds attract LDL in the digestive tract and pull out LDL, particularly oxidized LDL, into the stool. And here's we're talking about the right amount of nuts and seeds, which means eating a 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce per meal, which leads to a 1.5 to 3 ounce consumption based on body weight size, and whether you're heavy or whether you're somebody like me who needs more, or somebody who's overweight needs less and needs to lower caloric intake. But in that quintile I showed you in the slide here, where the highest lifespan was in people in the highest quintile, the highest quintile was more than 1.5 ounces a day. So the minimal amount of nuts and seeds people should use about a 1/2 ounce with meal, because a 1/2 ounce with the meal also maximizes absorption of the anti-cancer phytochemicals from the vegetables, from the beans, from the other things you're eating, because the fat-soluble vitamins and the phytochemicals are a heightened absorption by you including some fat in the diet, and some fat in that meal is even more enhanced. And the group that had the highest mortality was people eating less than half an ounce a day. So less than half an ounce is not enough. An ounce is okay, but an ounce and a half or more is best. And my career, the last 35 years, I've, had taken care of tens of thousands of people with obesity and advanced heart disease, tens of thousands of people who've lowered their blood pressure, reversed their diabetes, lost weight, and reversed their heart disease or high blood pressure and lowered their cholesterol with the inclusion of nuts and seeds. There's no need to exclude nuts and seeds and increase risk of death to get results. So we're saying here's a systemic review of 6 meta-analysis, 6 systemic reviews of all the studies published since 2018, showed that nut-enriched diets showed decrease of body fat and body fat mass. And here's a 2023 review article in the journal Nutrients, showed consistent evidence, showed benefits for weight control and prevention of long-term weight gain, especially when substituted from equal amount of calories for carbohydrate, and leading to sustained weight loss because there's some effect on eating nuts and seeds and making you not feel like snacking, not getting hungry, or not needing to eat too much in the next meal. So nuts and seeds have beneficial effects of helping people be satisfied with lower caloric intake. And that mixture of having some beans and some nuts and seeds and some green vegetables with lunch and with dinner make you feel satisfied with the more normal sized portions on your plate. You don't need to eat large amounts of food because they're very satisfying. Whereas very low fat diets are comparatively unsafe. They still might be better than the American diet and still maybe show results in some sick people, but they're not going to be the diet that's going to maximize this person's ability to live a longer life without problems developing. Because we know we have enhanced mitochondrial function and ion channel and transport mechanisms when you have especially ALA incorporated from flax seeds and walnuts, and these offering protection against calcium overload, and other mechanisms that have been shown to increase the irritability of the myocytes or the heart cells. So we show that in these studies, like the Physicians' Health Study, where they showed a 60% reduction in sudden cardiac death from people eating an ounce of nuts and seeds on the average, an ounce a day, showed a tremendous reduction of death caused by an irregular heartbeat or a cardiac arrhythmia. And now we're seeing also in studies a dose-dependent relationship in reducing the risk of atrial fibrillation in people eating nuts and seeds versus a very low-fat diet. And the Prevamid study I mentioned corroborated that the lowest mortality and lowest cardiovascular event and longest life occurred, of course, in people eating nuts and seeds and randomized to continue nut and seed intake, not olive oil intake. So the low-fat diet had the worst long-term outcomes. So this idea or this myth that's been perpetuated and continued to be advertised in the vegan or plant-based community, that fat is the reason people get fat, is just not true. And the ultra-low-fat diets are particularly dangerous ways to lose weight. You can lose weight just as effectively, more effectively, and my work over my lifetime has demonstrated that. With when the average person loses, even when they come to my retreat, it's amazing how much weight they lose. The average male probably loses 20 pounds the first month, and the average female probably loses about 15 pounds the first month. But then they continue to lose 8 to 12 pounds a month, continuing till they get to their ideal weight. And I'm saying a Nutritarian is somebody who's eating right at their ideal weight, eating a large amount of high nutrient foods, or a Nutritarian is somebody who's overweight, eating right, but moving in the direction of their ideal weight. Because if you're not moving in the direction of your ideal weight, then you're still going to be promoting inflammatory compounds. And we see that as you tweak the diet to adjust the foods you're eating with more of the lower, with more foods that promote weight loss, that fill you up, and adjust your diet accordingly, then people lose weight steadily, and they're tremendously protected while they're overweight, because while they're still overweight, as long as they're in a losing process, their estrogens come down, their CRP, the markers of inflammation, has come down, the oxidized LDL is lowering, the stickiness of the platelets go down. In other words, the risk of the endothelial lining the inflammation goes away. The risk of heart attack goes down by 1,000-fold immediately, switching to this healthy way of eating. But after they get lost weight, they go back to eating unhealthy again, go back on a cruise, go back to Vegas and pig out in the buffets, and you gain weight again. And even that instantaneously gaining weight for a week is going to put you at high risk again. The direction of which your weight, if you're overweight, the direction of your travel is tremendously critical in determining your risk. But here's a study that I published a few years back on about over 400 people, showing the dramatic reduction in blood pressure of 6 months of following a Nutritarian diet. And I also gave examples of many, many examples in the same study of people who had seriously advanced heart disease, who reversed their heart disease on the Nutritarian diet, which includes the use of greens, beans, and nuts and seeds, and is not trying to be extremely low in fat under any false, under those, you could say, disproven pretenses. So if you're interested in reading more about this, here's the journal article that was published in the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention in 2020, called Nuts and Seeds for Heart Disease Prevention, which contains over 50 references and review of the science documenting the benefits of consuming nuts and seeds to prevent heart attacks, strokes, and particularly important, having irregular heartbeats, cardiac arrhythmias, and life-threatening and atrial fibrillation, just developing atrial fibrillation. Here's a couple of examples. Here's Martin, who was 266 pounds in near death. He obviously lost 120 pounds. He got rid of 11 different medications. He had enlarged heart, cardiomyopathy, high blood pressure, congestive heart failure with anemia. He was on 11 medications, and now he's age 74, I think, today. I didn't update the slide. He weighs under 150. He's got normal heart rhythm. His ejection fraction came back to normal, and he's a certified health and wellness coach now. It's amazing. He went from being an unhealthy person to a super healthy person. Here's Michael, who was admitted with heart failure, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, uncontrolled diabetes. He had a heart attack. His ejection fraction was 20%, requiring oxygen. After failed radio frequency ablation and multiple cardioversions to get his heart back in the right rhythms, the doctors thought he was going to die. He was left in the hospital to die, but luckily they got him to switch his diet in the hospital, and they brought the food in for him, and he got better. He slowly got better, and now years later, this is like even 5 or 6 years later, left ventricular remodeling, restoration of ejection fraction, off all medications, and completely reversed the type 2 diabetes and the retinal damage from diabetes. Normal intraocular pressure came back, and of course, so the point is, there's so many representative cases, and it's not a question of my diet better than your diet. I mean, there's a lot of ways, anytime a person is losing weight, eating healthier, it's good for them. But when we're looking at maximizing lifespan and having optimal health in later years, then I'm advocating and giving people information. They can take this further to tweak the diet to make it more protective in their later years. So here's a few more examples. Here's a person with a total obstruction in their carotid artery that opened up with ultrasounds and CT angiogram. There's a person with a 240-pound male with a 60 to 80% occlusion in their carotid artery, measured by IMT measurements and with IMT, which is intermediate thickness. And he lost 80 pounds at 1 year. So the 80% or 60% blockage went to 40%. And by 2-year follow-up, there was no blockage detected at all. So here's another person who, the same thing showing that we were plaque reduction. And of course, here's a person, a 66-year-old male, developed atrial fibrillation on a very low-fat vegan diet, which resolved with repair of the omega-3 index and inclusion of nuts and seeds in the diet. So we're talking here about this concept of eating the diet to be more protein solid, because we have decreased protein bioavailability with aging, whereas we pass the age of 75 and we're absorbing protein. For some people that are unhealthy, they're getting less protein absorption at the age of 70, but they're not even, and they start to become 75 and they need more protein to maintain immune function. But I'm saying if we're healthier and aging slower, it's usually later on in life, but protein bioavailability and absorption does go down, and we eat a diet that contains more greens, more beans, including soybean, and more nuts and seeds. It means we lower the glycemic load of the diet, we improve both diabetic and cardiovascular parameters, and we have enhanced muscle and bone strength with aging, which gives us enhanced immune function. So we can say that weakening of the bones and weakening of the muscles, called sarcopenia with aging, also decreases immune function. And we want to maintain exercise with a plant diet that gives us adequate protein, with aging to maintain neuroplasticity, mental function, and physical function. So this is a little review slide for you, what we're talking about here. We're talking about that to age slower and push that envelope of immune longevity. We want to build up those longevity proteins like SIRT1 and AMP kinase, and we get more production and more stabilizing of the stem cells and telomeres and reduced inflammation. And we built up those longevity proteins through life by having a high phytochemical exposure to a wide variety of plants, but particularly green vegetables, regular exercise, and moderate caloric restriction. Whereas mTOR builds up, which is high in all invasive cancers, like 100% of invasive cancers, which is seen to be higher in more animal protein intake, excessive calories, and high glycemic carbohydrates, which activates cancer-promoting genes and promotes oxidative stress. And of course, so we're talking here about perfecting your plant-based diet, whereas a diet too high in fruit could be unfavorable, especially as you age and your protein bioavailability goes down. So we don't want people to be on a fruitarian diet. Diets high in potato, rice, and bread, not favorable because they're not eating enough vegetables, beans, and nuts. And they're not getting enough variety in their diet, enough nutritional variety, because their diet, and those diets may be beneficial for people, and especially in the masses, maybe if can't afford to have salad or to exposure to have fruits, and maybe I can't exposure to have green vegetables and onions and mushrooms and things like that. But so there are some application for a diet high in inexpensive carbohydrate, but still we have this unprecedented opportunity in human history to be able to have access to and to be able to people to afford a more variety of plant foods. They don't have to just eat one or two foods all day. They can get more foods. They can get more variety of food in their diet, and they can get exposure to green vegetables and beans and seeds. And beans are a higher protein source, and they're more lifespan favorable as a major source of carbohydrate than are other lower nutrient sources and lower protein sources of carbohydrate. Remember, the high protein grains include quinoa, amaranth, camu, teff, and buckwheat. And of course, whole wheat is not. And gluten is not a major, most people have to avoid anyway. And whole wheat, if eaten a whole wheat berry or a whole berry or a sprouted wheat, is still a good food. But when you grind it into a pastry flour and make it too glycemic, and even if you grind oats into a pastry flour, the more you grind it into a fine flour, the more as opposed to eating it as a whole grain or a sprouted grain. And keep in mind, the highest protein plant food is soybean, and utilizing some soybean in your diet is a lifespan promoting effect. Okay, moving on to the assumption that your diet is either vegan or near vegan. And what are the most critical supplements to protect your brain and your aging and your immune system as you age? And let's talk about that for a minute as well, because zinc is a particularly important nutrient that people aren't aware of on vegan diets, because there's lower absorption of zinc as you age. And even though plant foods may have zinc or adequate zinc in them, you don't absorb zinc as readily from the matrix of plants. The phytic acid binds zinc, and you usually get about half the absorption. And it's been well documented that higher zinc exposure and even zinc supplementation reduces risk of pneumonia and cancer. So let's review that for a minute. So we're going to talk about zinc and DHA, and we're not going to talk about that, just time restraints, but we're going to consider the fact that vitamin D, iodine, and K2 are helpful, but not as critically important, because you can get vitamin D from the sun, you can get iodine from seaweed, K2 you can get from fermented foods, but still, most people maybe could benefit from vitamin D, iodine, K2, but that's more in the field of a hypothesis and most likely beneficial. But things we know that are more critically important for vegans are, because vitamin D could be low in anybody, even not a vegan diet, but particularly in vegans, we're focused on making sure they have adequate B12, zinc, and DHA and EPA as measured by the omega-3 index. And that's what we're going to talk about now. And I did mention iron can be something that people need, but it's rare in males, but it's not even that common in females. But some people don't absorb iron well, and the need for iron supplementation should never be done unless there's a need for it. But the need is determined not by an iron level, but by a ferritin level. So if the ferritin gets too low, there could be a need for iron supplementation. Okay, so let's review first zinc and dementia. That zinc deficiency is common in the elderly, even those eating adequate zinc in their diet, and that the zinc deficiency can lead to more oxidative damage and immunosenescence, which means that reduction of immune system competency, increasing the risk of dangerous infections like pneumonia. And of course, zinc deficiency is also associated with lower levels of zinc in a dose-dependent manner, associated with more aging of the brain in neurodegenerative disorders, And of course, we're talking about memory, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, depression, and brain shrinkage linked to zinc deficiency. So zinc adequacy as opposed to zinc deficiency is important. So we know now that we don't get as much zinc exposure when we're not eating seafood and meat. And when we give people a reasonable dose of zinc, between 5 and 15 or 10 milligrams, here's a study with 15 milligrams showing a 70% reduction of risk of death from prostate cancer. And zinc supplements, the studies showing half the mortality from pneumonia. So clearly, these nutrients matter. And taking a little extra zinc on a vegan diet, it seems like it has a tremendous amount of support in the scientific literature that makes it reasonable and important to supplement. Now, DHA has a huge amount of data, especially in the last few years, have accumulated to the point of overwhelming amount of corroborative evidence. So I'm saying more than a dozen studies show that low levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the blood, as represented by a test called the omega-3 index, is linked to cognitive decline or dementia. But restoring the omega-3 index in the blood by taking supplements isn't going to reverse dementia, because dementia is a late-stage pathology. I'm saying it's the lifetime exposure to an adequate amount of omega-3 index that ultimately is going to maintain full brain size with aging. You can't wait till you shrink your brain and then expect to grow it back by fixing your omega-3 index. Just like it's lifetime exposure to salt that determines your risk of having a hemorrhagic stroke, it's lifetime exposure to an adequate DHA index that keeps the brain full size when we get to be 80 or 100 years old. And if you eat like other Americans are eating and die at the age of 80, then who cares? Let your omega-3 index be low. You're not going to live long enough to get demented that much anyway. So in other words, this is particularly important in us health aficionados who want to live a long time, because we want to be fully alive with our brain function if we're going to live to be 85, 95, 100 years old, right? So we have to pay attention to that. So here's a meta-analysis of 17 studies evaluating the omega-3 index, and those in the highest quintile were 15 to 80% less likely to die over the 15-year follow-up. So we're talking here about lower levels, not just shrinking of the brain, but linked to higher rates of all-cause mortality, including cancer mortality. So lower levels were associated with higher risk of cancer and heart disease and strokes. This is published in 2021. And here's another study published in 2021 that showed that the lower levels had an average of 5 years of life lost. That was in the lowest fifth compared to the highest fifth. And that meant that lower levels had the same increased death associated with smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, which was utterly crazy. And we're seeing more and more evidence. So I'm saying here that every study we have, as different researchers from around the world put together data, we see a tremendously powerful negative outcome in people with low levels of omega-3 index in their blood. And it might take years to get your levels to actually affect brain function. But remember, brain doesn't grow or change. It's neurologic tissue. It takes years and years for brain to shrink or grow or change. So we're talking here about decades of exposure, not a month of exposure. You can't expect a few months of exposure to brain levels or brain size. So even though it takes a long time to affect change, it's very important to get this right. So we're talking here that making sure your omega-3 index is at least above 5 and maybe preferably above 6. And keeping in mind that, people could argue, well, look, vegans don't have higher rates of dementia than non-vegans. Why would a vegan need to take DHA? They're not getting more dementia. See, that's a complete mythical or false argument, because the major cause of dementia isn't DHA deficiency. The major cause of dementia is diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, alcohol use, sugar intake, and from excess animal products, high saturated fat intake, eating cheese, and low micronutrient phytochemical intake shrinks the brain. So most risk factors for dementia and brain shrinkage is the standard American diet and all the bad things people are doing. But when we take a person who's cleaned up their act and eating healthfully and remove those common causes of dementia, now their remaining cause of dementia is not phytochemical deficits or high saturated fat intake or fried food or sweets. Now their risk of dementia is only low omega-3 index. What I'm saying right now, of course, is that The fact that these studies may show a 20 to 30% reduction of dementia in people with an adequate omega-3 index, that's not adequately reflecting the protection a vegan is going to get, because the omega-3 index is only a portion, low omega-3 index is only a relatively unusual cause of, or a small portion of the dementia cases on people on standard diets, where it's the major cause of dementia in a person on a vegan diet. So the people who do get dementia on a vegan diet, it's not caused by them eating hamburgers and bacon, it's caused by the low omega-3 index. So they're the ones who are going to benefit from it the most. So it's the healthy eating vegans where that becomes their only risk factor. And it's the healthy eating vegans who are going to live long enough to get dementia and to have brain shrinkage in later life be a negative factor for them, that are going to get the most strongly benefit from omega-3 supplementation. So here's, of course, a research study on 150 vegans showing 64% had insufficient levels, and that was below 4. But we're saying now that more evidence is showing that you start to get that below 4 is more seriously deficient, and the level really should be above 5 or maybe even above 6. I wanted most people's levels to be above 5.5. And so what we're seeing a lot of, and I've seen in my career as the doctor taking care of a huge amount of the vegan community over the last 30 years, I think I've had more experience than anybody in taking care of long-term vegans who started this in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, who came to me in their elderly years with a higher amount of exposure, with higher probability of developing a problem, unhealthy, natural food, whole food vegan diets, developing later life neurologic deficits, including Parkinson's disease. And we talked about xenobiotic exposure to toxins earlier in the lecture. And I'm talking here about the low omega-3 index increases the ability of toxins or xenobiotics to damage your body, including the cause of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, and ALS as well. So as we're talking about all these chemicals causing Parkinson's, or these chemicals causing ALS, or the Parkinson's dementia syndrome, as we're talking about that, keep in mind that the lower omega-3 index and an unfavorable omega-3 index enhances the toxicity or ability of those xenobiotics to cause damage in the body. So here's some more DHA and dementia references if you're interested. And so to start to sum this up, I'm saying that a Nutritarian eats a variety of high nutrient plants, trying to achieve a wide variety of foods. And us Nutritarians don't eat empty calorie foods like sugar and sweeteners and white flour, processed foods. We avoid animal products, oils, and salt, and we're controlling overeating and snacking at the same time. We don't want to eat till we're full or stuff ourselves late at night. So we're talking here that the average American may live to be about 78 years old, but their life deteriorates before they die. Whereas the purpose of being a Nutritarian is pushing the envelope of my advocating such a diet with such a high degree of nutritional excellence, and the expectations you can make a radical change towards healthy eating is really worth it. It's worth it because you'll build back your taste muscle, and you'll learn to enjoy eating this way with a tremendous assortment of fantastic recipes. And you're not just living longer, you're keeping yourself vitally functioning with your full physical and mental capacity and ability to think creatively into your later years. And if you're not going to achieve that, then why bother living longer if life is going to turn into if you're going to live in a nursing home or have a poor quality life? So the whole point is you have a tremendous power to control your health destiny. And nutrition, these advancements in nutritional science has given us this unprecedented opportunity to live longer in better health than ever before. So to review, eat at least a half a cup of beans a day, eat at least 3 fresh fruits a day, include berries in there, especially things like blackberries, wild blueberries. Eat at least 1.5 ounces of nuts and seeds a day, and include those, and try to include maybe even as a half of that if you can, in the ones that are high in omega-3 nuts and seeds, which are walnuts, flax, chia, and hemp, right? Eat at least 1 salad a day, a nice big salad with onions and mushroom with onions on there. Make the salad dressing from nuts and seeds in there, not oil. And, we use mixed nuts and seeds with vinegar. I just mix something like a thickened tomato sauce with sun-dried tomatoes with some almonds and hemp seeds and a little bit of blood orange, a little bit of black fig vinegar and some roasted garlic. It makes an incredibly delicious dressing. All these incredibly delicious dressings made with healthy ingredients that are part of the health of the meal. And have some cooked vegetables every day too. And of course, eat some cooked mushrooms and raw onions or scallion every day too. Here's a few examples of people who had advanced cancers. Here's Pam in 1997 who had ovarian cancer metastasized to her lung, given just a few months to live. 4 liters of cancer fluid was pulled out of her lung, and she's still alive today. Here's Irene, who reversed her lymphoma. No chemo, no treatments, just the Nutritarian diet, and her lymphoma went away. Here's Lee, who got rid of her breast cancer, metastasized to the bones, and disappeared. I couldn't believe it. I had to repeat the test again. I thought they got the wrong person mixed up, but it went away. And there's other people whose serious cancers melted away, including scores of men with early stage prostate cancers who had positive biopsies with PSAs going down, the prostate cancer disappearing with no intervention. And here's examples of people who lost weight and got rid of the multiple sclerosis. Here's another case getting rid of the multiple sclerosis, another case getting rid of the multiple sclerosis, another case getting rid of the lupus, a girl on a national renal transplant list waiting for a new kidney with a creatinine of 4.2, following this approach, having her kidney return to normal, getting rid of her lupus, and that being reproducible. And that's been the real treasure and reward of my career, was been to help so many people from serious illnesses reverse these illnesses and get back to good health again. So good, best of health to all of you, and hope you learned something new, and I motivated you to make important beneficial changes to your habits, your lifestyle, and your diet. Okay, I'll lay it open for questions now.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That was some great information. First, I would just give you the opportunity to let us learn a little bit more about where we can get your books, where the audience can find you on social media.
Well, I guess they could probably get them anywhere. The best place to get them is drfuhrman.com, because a lot of other information there they can have, including more recipe ideas. But yes, I think that Eat for Life, since it's my most recent book with the most updated references, is the one to get. And my favorite, and they all have recipes in them, but my favorite cookbook is the one you're showing there, is the Eat to Live cookbook, which is the recipes I like the best. Some people say they like the Eat to Live Quick and Easy cookbook better because they're more like quicker, but I like the regular Eat to Live recipes the best. But in any case, yes, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you. I'll definitely check them out. So thanks for sharing. We're about to open up our Q&A. Just want to go over a few things with regard to the Q&A. We will not be taking questions directly from the chat. We will take them. So I'll be asking some questions, but for the audience that wants to ask questions, you'll need to raise your hand to do so. You need to go in Zoom to the bottom right-hand side. You'll see a button second from the left called Reactions. You'll click on that and you'll choose Raise Hand. We will pick on you in the order in which the questions were received. When it's your turn, I will unmute you and prompt you to state your name, where you're from, and to ask your question. I ask that everyone keep their questions brief and on topic. Then we will mute you in order to give everyone a chance who wants to ask a question from the audience. We will only allow for one question without follow-up questions. If you do wish to ask a follow-up question, you can go on the back of the line, and if we have time to get to you, we will. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a quick question here. So toward the end of your presentation, you were talking about DHA and EPA, and you mentioned that the highest fifth was had the best results. Was that? Do you know, were they supplementing with DHA, EPA, or was that dietary? Or do we have any insight into that?
There's in all the reviews of the studies, some included supplements and some were dietary and some were mixed. So yes, there's and all those things are interrelated and contributory to the total DHA level. So yes, it could be, and the aspect here, this unique viewpoint that we don't want to get our levels up by eating fish. We don't want to hit adequate levels by eating fish because it exposes us to too many toxins. We want to get our levels up by using a supplement that doesn't expose us to the toxins, like eating shellfish, oysters, and high omega-3 fish. So yes, so we're talking here about presenting studies where it shows supplementing, but also the supplementations losing their efficacy if you're going to start when it's later in life when the person already shrunk their brain. It has to be earlier exposure, many years of exposure to these things. So the answer is both supplements and fish both can raise the level, and both been shown to protect brain size. But then fish has its own unique negative effect because more modern fish consumption, maybe not fish 50 years ago, but more seafood eaten today has more toxic compounds that makes eating fish as a source of raising your your omega-3 index more unfavorable than it would have been if you had our parents who have their brain sustained and these higher fish people eating more fish, having a higher omega-3 index, and their brain might have been okay for them because they lived years ago when the oceans weren't as polluted, but not for us moving forward. We've got to avoid the use of fish and use more supplements to keep those toxins out of our brain.
And what kind of supplement should a plant-based eater get for DHA, EPA? That'd be algae. What kind of supplement?
All the vegan DHA in this country is made from algae, and it's all made by the same company. So every supplement on the market from every brand has been manufactured by the same company as a supplier to the person selling it. I have one available on my website. What makes ours different is not that the product's the same. It's just we keep it refrigerated in dark glass, and we keep it so when people order it, they're not getting something that's sat at room temperature for 6 months and potentially could start to become rancid. So yes, you can buy it anywhere from any company, and it's all the same ingredient. It's just a question of the amount of how much you're taking, whether there's a preservative added, and how it's packed. So we pack ours in glass and keep it refrigerated. But the other ones, if you get another company version, could be just as good, as long as it's not old and out of the refrigerator for 6 to 8 months, as long as you're buying a product that's relatively fresh. We keep ours refrigerated so people know if it's been manufactured 6 or 8 or 10 months ago, you're still getting a fresh product.
Great. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to turn it over to the audience. Sylvia, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Yes, my name is Sylvia Schrecker, and I'm from Arizona. And it's more of a statement, I guess. It seems like everybody around me has diabetes, kidney disease, liver disease. And my boss's mom just lost her mom 6 weeks ago. Now her dad is dying from stage 4 kidney cancer. He has liver problems. How do I talk to these people how do I share this information with them? I have shared videos with like I said, my boss, and she agrees with it, but yet, how do you get through to people?
That's that we could do a whole other 2-hour presentation on that, maybe, but and I have, and what I'm saying right now is it's really difficult because people are strongly addicted. And when I lecture to big audiences, the majority of people don't change. They say, this is good information and it sounds interesting and it sounds even scientific and I like it, but it's not for me. It's for the person next to me because I can't do it. It's too hard for me to do that. And the primitive brain has a lot of excuses why people can't do it. But in any case, all we could do is try to have creative goodwill for people. And that's good for our emotional health and our physical health as well. So when somebody accosts you or threatens or feels like, oh, if I had eaten like that, I'd rather be dead because I couldn't, and who wants to eat so strictly and blah, 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 blah. The answer is our only response is to try to be a good role model ourselves and then to try to show people we care about them. And because our own ability to care for people and have emotions for them is good for our own health. It's the best way to have good emotional health ourselves. So having creative goodwill is thinking of how you can affect this person, show you care about them, and affect them in some way positively. And maybe you'll have a good effect on them, and maybe you won't. But the effort to have a good effect on their life and the effort to show them care and goodwill and love is going to be good for you as well. So it's a win-win, whether they do it or not. And show them that your care for them is not dependent on whether they follow you or listen to you or not. You just have a care for them that's irrespective of what they do. So you're not like forcing somebody to follow this. You're not forcing your child or your spouse to do anything. You're just showing how much you love them, and you're exposing them to this information because you'd love them to be healthy if they could be, but it's really their decision to make.
Great. Thank you very much, Doctor. Our next audience question is coming from Martin. Martin, please state your name, where you're from, and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Martin Persson. I'm from Sweden, Stockholm. And I wonder about end-stage renal disease, also when you're on dialysis, having polycystic kidney disease. if there are any tweaks, or I know phosphorus and also potassium might be an issue. So if you could address that, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you. Well, I have seen people with kidney insufficiency get well and reverse it, but not when the kidney insufficiency or kidney failure has progressed to the point where they're on dialysis. So we want those people to eat healthy so they can enhance their survival and reduce their risk from cardiovascular death when they're on dialysis. And we do want them to eat healthfully. But the expectation is that they've gotten to a point where they need dialysis. But in the stages before they have dialysis, then this diet that's designed to be somewhat lower in potassium, only if the potassium is raising or starting to be abnormal. With minor stages of kidney insufficiency, they can eat all these foods that are rich in minerals and potassium. And then sometimes they can add a potassium binder if they have to suck some potassium out into the stool. But in any case, once they're on dialysis, and they're being monitored, then you don't have to be as critically to watch calcium and phosphorus. We just want to watch, they don't need dialysis extra amount, but you can still do this program with a slight modification to the diet. And so it is important for those people with kidney insufficiency, and it's still important for people who are on dialysis not to eat too much not to eat animal protein or not to eat processed carbohydrates. It's still detrimental to those people. So this idea of moving to natural plant food diet is still better for them. But thank you for that.
Thank you. Early in your talk, you were talking about salt. For healthy people who would like to substitute salt, is potassium chloride a viable alternative?
Well, I like people to avoid salt and avoid potassium salts because I want to build back their taste muscle. And even though the potassium salt has minor negative effects compared to sodium chloride, it's still the case that it keeps their desire for sodium and it lowers their ability to taste the flavor of natural foods. So when people even though the food tastes bland, when people start out this way, taking the salt out of their diet, they enhance their ability to not only taste salt in vegetables, but taste other subtle flavors that are in vegetables they couldn't taste from when they were on the high salt diet. So potassium chloride is a better option, but it's still not something I personally recommend or serve people because I want them to start to get their taste muscle back and get off the highly palatable diet with too much salt and sugar in it. And too much hot spices also deaden the taste buds. I want it to be more mildly spiced, not to be so heavily spiced, because it can deaden your taste so you can't enjoy the natural flavors in foods. And also I'm avoiding things that are that hot water, like hot tea and hot coffee. The heat of this, or hot soup, the heat coming off the soup or the coffee or the tea can microburn the throat and the tongue, increasing risk of throat and tongue cancer. So we don't want people to drink beverages and cause microburns to their throat and tongue, just being too temperature-wise hot. Do you follow me?
Sure.
Let the thing be warm hot, not hot, not super hot. So some people get addicted to really hot beverages, and we don't want them doing that too. We don't want them to do that either.
Thank you for that. So you were discussing about not eating late in the night, pretty much, cutting it off at a reasonable hour. This is kind of a question about intermittent fasting. A lot of people are into intermittent fasting, and it sounds like you're kind of like naturally doing intermittent fasting when you do that. What about people who don't wake up early in the morning? I'm sorry, not that they don't wake up early in the morning, but they're not hungry early in the morning and want to eat later in the day, just naturally by their cycle. Is that okay?
No, it's not as lifespan enhancing as doing it the other way around. In other words, if you're going to reduce your caloric window, you want to have you don't want to eat late at night. So you don't want to eat late at night and then skip breakfast. You're not going to benefit from that type of intermittent fasting because you're going to bed on a full stomach. You want to go to bed on an empty stomach. So eating earlier then makes you want to eat. Finishing dinner earlier or eating a light and early dinner makes you want to eat breakfast at 7, 8, 9, or 10 o'clock. You don't want to go to 12 o'clock because by 9 o'clock, you're really hungry because you didn't eat since 4 or 5 o'clock the night before, and it wasn't your big meal. Your big meal was lunch. So you can eat 2 meals a day and eat at like 10 and 4 or something like that. That's fine too. But if you're eating 3 meals, then you still shouldn't be skipping breakfast and eating a heavy dinner, in other words.
Okay. Now, you were talking about sugars earlier, and Are you talking about processed sugar? What about fruits, the fructose that comes from fruit? How is that as far as health is concerned?
Well, there's studies on that, like the WHEAL study, Women's Healthy Eating Living study, show that women who ate vegetables lived the longest and had lower rates of cancer. But women who ate vegetables and fruit did even better, had even more protection against cancer. So what I'm saying right now is almost every study that we're finding, as people expands their variety of plant foods eaten, you have better outcome. And as they narrow the variety of foods eaten, you have worse outcome. So we don't want to restrict access to natural foods. We want to have a wide variety of foods in our diet. And so that we want people to not to avoid eating fruit. That said, if the diet gets too high in fruit, then it lowers the protein in the diet, because the only plant food that's low in protein is fruit compared to vegetables and beans and whole grains and nuts and seeds, which are all high in protein, relatively high in protein. So your diet, so a person who's of middle age and young has an ability, they don't need as much protein because they absorb protein so efficiently. But as we age, we absorb protein more difficult, not as easily. And our muscle mass is harder to build, and making sure the protein is adequate in our diet, even for a vegan, is valuable. So the people will say, protein doesn't matter, you can't be low in protein. Well, yeah, that's kind of true, but it's not true if we want to maximize health, physical and mental ability in later life. Then protein does matter in a vegan diet. And then if your diet is too high in fruit and you're on a fruitarian diet, maintained in your later years, you're going to have a higher risk of infection, more fungal infections, fungal nail, losing your hair more, and having more infection, more skin infections, and more risk of pneumonia. And I've seen that in my patients over the years, that these people on fruitarian diets that were too high in fruit because they had more immune system problems. I even had one person that died. They were a young guy, he's about 38 years old, who was on a fruitarian diet, and he got a pneumonia. And I told him, you got to take an antibiotic. This is a bacterial pneumonia. And he was such a naturalist, so much of a naturalist, and Dr. Shelton says no medication, that he refused the antibiotic. And he came to me, by the time he got into my office, he was so sick that I said, I can't help you. Go right to the emergency room, because and he went to the emergency room and he died in the emergency room because he refused the antibiotic, because he was such a naturalist against drugs. So even when there's some kind of, so obviously there's a lesson to be learned there. But the point I'm making is, yes, fruit is healthy, but not to the point where your diet becomes mostly fruit. Then it's not an ideal diet at that point.
Thank you. I believe that you've said that.
I didn't say why. I didn't explain why the sugar from fruit is okay and the sugar from sugar is not okay. I didn't but it's the sugar that's intracellular as opposed to free sugar. So once it's intracellular, then it actually gets bound to fiber, and then it gets absorbed more slowly, and the fiber then attaches and gets fed by bacteria in the gut, which then slows the absorption of sugar and when it translocates, there's nutrients coming with it. So it changes the whole biochemical utilization of sugar when you're chewing fruit and mixing it with saliva, compared to taking apple juice or sugar or taking sugar out of the fruit, or using honey and maple syrup, which has no fiber, which do not have fiber with them. So it's a different, and of course, it's not also the amount of glucose and fructose grams are not as high either as you concentrate the sugar. So it's different biology. The same thing with oil from nuts. You know what I mean? So sugar becomes okay when you're eating fresh fruit, but not when you're taking it in an isolated form and in excessive amounts.
Thank you. So I believe that you said that you see a lot of plant-based patients, and you are seeing these plant-based patients come in to some extent. Some of them have dementia. Besides DHA and EPA, what are they doing in their lifestyle that may be contributing to them getting dementia despite their plant-based diet?
I'm mentioning that my entry into the plant-based community was because my father was sickly and overweight when I was young, in my teenage years. And he read Dr. Shelton's works, and we became members of the American Natural Hygiene Society in those days. And I would watch the lectures by Herbert Shelton and Kiki Sidwa and Virginia Vitrano and all these doctors who were my mentors and who I looked up to. And these people who were older than me, I learned from about plant-based nutrition, got excited about it. And these were people who were not eating junk food vegan diets. They were eating super healthy whole food diets. And so my practice, when I became a medical doctor, these people who I knew from this organization and from the American Vegan Society and other vegans around the world who were early adopters of the vegan diet in the 1950s and 1960s, in 1970s became my patients, and when they developed problems, and I had a lot of people who were long-term elderly vegans in my medical practice. And so I have personal exposure and experience, and they did not generally get heart disease and strokes and cancers, but they had more higher incidence of neurologic issues in later life, like dementia and Parkinson's. And maybe that's because they lived so long. But Dr. Shelton himself, who was the hallmark of the natural food movement, the founder of one of the best early pioneers of this movement, he didn't live that long, and he died of Parkinson's disease. So my struggle as a physician was, I'm an advocate of the plant-based movement, but I'm seeing the elderly members and founders of the movement advocating whole food plant-based diet develop some diseases. What could this be due to? So that's why I was drawing blood on them, and an early adopter of these blood tests and advocating what they could be low in, and being shocked at how low their omega-3 index was. And some of the people that was developing Parkinson's had levels that were like almost non-measurable, 0, 1, and 2. The low levels in the blood did mean something and did correlate with the severity of their neurologic deficits. So I have a unique experience as a clinician, and being a board certified family physician means I'm taking care of people, taking their insurance, taking care of people of all ages, and having a busy practice where attracting people who are more plant favored, knowing I was a plant oriented doctor that could help them.
Thank you. So I want to ask you about the diabetic drug Ozempic being used for weight loss. What are your thoughts about the use of that drug for weight loss?
It's like asking me about the Impossible Burger. It's like the same kind of questions, people are always looking for some escape. They don't have to eat healthy. They can take a blood pressure medication. They can still eat, cheesecake and, but they want to take a diabetic medication. Now they still want to, whatever. The minute by the way, I call these things, the doctors are the enablers. They enable people to continue their bad lifestyle choices, but to think their blood pressure looks okay, or their blood glucose looks okay, or their blood cholesterol looks okay to take a statin. They don't have to change their lifestyle. They're just pushing everything under the rug. And what good is a medication that causes a little bit of weight loss if the minute you stop the medication, the weight comes back? And the weight comes back, it comes back fast, which makes you at more danger. That means you're putting people on drugs for the rest of their lives. And when you put people on drugs the rest of their lives, it's not the expense, it's the biochemical expense of increasing risk of cancer and kidney disease and other problems of the body, of putting people on drugs the rest of their life. You don't get something for nothing. You know what I mean? You don't get a biochemical or biological effect, a pharmaceutical effect, without some toxic effect. So it's not working because it's a health food. So the answer is, I would not advocate that. I would advocate people make radical and significant change in the way they're eating, and learn all the data and all the information that motivates them to get rid of their food addiction, including the mindfulness training and the philosophical training that gives them a happier way of viewing reality, by appreciating the natural world and getting excited about the beauty and the miraculous healing potential of bok choy, and supporting and becoming a gardener, and how much satisfaction you get from growing your foods that you're going to eat yourself, and how much satisfaction you get sharing good health with other people and wanting to share the works, your efforts of your own particular, whatever you're growing. I want people to grow something. We live in an apartment. And I want us to share that bounty with others, and to share the bounty of good health and of care and love and consideration and goodwill for people, and marry that with healthy food to feel that we don't have to be living in fear of disease. We can live with peace, joy, and passion for every day we're alive, and waking up enjoying our life. And it's a shame that the world has deviated into the opposite of this, with wars and killing and junk food and people with cancer and strokes and people living in nursing homes and with kidney failure and can't take care of themselves and being demented. It's a shame that how we've taken away this opportunity. But more of us working together can feel we're getting more reward of our life. And what I'm saying right now is that these drugs and living with fear and going to doctors, measuring your blood and getting mammograms and colonoscopies and prostate exams and all these tests, and the fear shortens people's lifespan, because they're not living with confidence, passion, and peacefulness. they're living with chronic fear of being sick all the time, and chronic fear of being prodded and made uncomfortable and being in a hospital and getting serious conditions develop. So they're not living a healthy life, doesn't benefit them. The instant pleasure they get from eating junk food and highly palatable food results in tremendous human tragedy that makes them suffer to an inordinate amount of suffering. Is not worth it. It's better to live with confidence and lack of fear, and you don't have to not needing doctors. I always tell people that I don't go to doctors. I don't even go to myself.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That is going to conclude our question and answer session. I really appreciate that. I know you'll be back for a panel later on. So we'll get to see you again. So real quickly, we're just going to unmute the audience so everyone could appreciate, or show their appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fuhrman, you saved my life.
Love your love.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fuhrman.
Love you for all you do. And to yourself.
God bless you.
Thank you.